Last year was a difficult year in terms of disease for a lot of growers. It really started to kick off from July of last year to right through to December. There was widespread disease across farms in Ireland and Northern Ireland. And I suppose, look, I was just looking through the list of growers that I would be in contact with. 31 farms actually reported significant crop loss due to disease, with many farms reporting loss of several third flushes. So it was a massive problem in 2020. And I suppose that the reason why I'm giving a presentation like this is let's hopefully we can put some measures in place early to avoid disease levels building up on farms. So many farms found it extremely difficult to control their disease outbreak because disease levels got into an unsustainable level, and then at that stage you're firefighting. So it's all about being ahead of the problem before it becomes the problem, you know. So Cobweb and verticillium were the most common diseases reported to me last year. I suppose why has this happened? There's a number of possible reasons why there was such a huge surge in disease. One, I would highlight fly infestation. A lot of farms I visited, it seemed like the fly numbers had got out of control, and once you're fighting a battle with flies, it's going to be very difficult to turn your disease problems around. So cobweb resistance against Orvando, although we can't fully verify this because we've done our own lab-based trials in Ashtown, and what it's indicating to us from samples we received from a number of different growers around the country is that there is resistance built up against Orvando, not to all strains of cobweb, but definitely to some. We recently looked at a sample and we tested it against resistance against Orvando or against Sporegun, and Sporegun actually worked quite well. So it's not a bad exercise to do in terms of if you're finding that you're using a product and it's not working, best take maybe a sample and maybe send it into ourselves and we can have a look at it in the lab, and hopefully at some stage in the near future we'll be able to verify these results by doing a trial in Ashtown. Other factors were just general poor farm hygiene, poor treatment of disease. You can see here in the photo, like that was a crop that was treated with disease. That's not going to stop disease from spreading. You know, there's simply not enough salt being used in this picture here. Other factors, dirty crates. There's a lot of reports that the crates weren't clean. Movement of personnel between flushes. Obviously, that's going to be always a factor to spreading disease. And there's also a bit of construction work. So when there's construction work, there's dust and particles in there, and that ends up infecting crops and causing disease. So in terms of impact, what impact it had on growers, I done one example in terms of financial impact for one grower who continuously lost third flushes for 6 weeks. And what that financially meant for that grower is that he actually lost 15,000. So every third flush he lost equated to 2,500 euro. So that's a significant cost, a direct loss of 15,000 over the 6-week period. And you can imagine there was growers who lost third flushes for a lot longer than 6 weeks. So you can imagine the significant loss that was hit. Other impacts that caused by disease outbreaks, other financial impacts, not only financial but the actual farm morale can be difficult one to manage. So not enough work for harvesters and lower productivity, and that ends up leading to staff retention issues, staff not happy because they don't have enough hours, and that means they don't have enough money and they end up moving. So another problem is that there was a lot of growers that was unable to fill orders. So basically demand was so strong in 2020 that when disease hits growers, you know, they were basically unable to fill their quotas. And what this means is that the suppliers then, or the marketeers, have to go and buy mushrooms elsewhere. So that caused a problem for everybody. And then other just on-farm problems increase operational costs. So you have to increase your level of disease treatment, you increase the level of chemical application, you're applying more plant protection products, you're using more PPE around the farm, and there's some growers who went to the extent of actually washing crates. So it is a significant cost, and there also leads to be mushroom quality issues then also. So integrated pest management, I suppose this comes up, I get asked the question about what is integrated pest management. It comes up every year when you do your Board B audit, your Global Gap or your Red Tractor. And I suppose, look, basically to simplify integrated pest management, it's about putting prevention strategies in place, cultural, physical, and biological controls in place. And if all fails, then your only option might be to use chemicals, but it's to use all those non-chemical strategies to try and prevent disease and pest infestation. And then if all fails, then your final option would be to use a pesticide. In terms of flies, so I just touched briefly, flies could be a huge problem on some farms, and once you've got high numbers of flies in your farm, they can spread disease rapidly. So you can see here in the top right hand corner, you've got a photo of flies on mushrooms, and those mushrooms are now developing disease as we, from you can see on that photo, that's a disease mushroom already. So just to put it in context, one female Ciarid fly who actually lands on who enters the mushroom crop at case run, that female fly will lay up to 150 eggs in clusters of 10 to 15. So from those 150 new flies, from 150 eggs, 150 new flies will emerge. Normally emerge from between first and second flush. So of the 150 new flies, there'll be 75 female, and that's only the starter. So those 75 will then start to lay more eggs, and the cycle continues, and you'd see a rapid increase in flies, especially like I said, in between the first and second. And like when fly levels are so high, it's highly probable that the flies will reinfect fresh crops. So if you've got high numbers in a third flush and you're filling the crop next to it, there's a high possibility that those flies will infect that fresh crop. This is a critical time of the year when conditions are favorable. You can see from this week's weather that it was quite, it was warm, and you'll just start to see fly levels build up from this time of the year. So the photo I have here, I'll just try and get my pointer. Sorry, the fly on the left-hand side is the Ciarid fly, and the fly on the right-hand side is the forward fly. The forward doesn't usually present itself until late summer, autumn time, but it's important to just monitor your fly traps and make yourself aware of what these flies look like, and be able to identify them from your own point of view. So I'll just go through a step-by-step plan to avoid disease infection. This I suppose are the main points I feel. If you tick the box with all these points that I'm discussing, it might give you a fighting chance of maybe keeping your farm clean throughout the year, or else at a sustainable level that you're not going to start losing third flushes. So one of the key areas, Brendan's after going through a lot of detail in it, is filling. I'll talk a wee bit about the hygiene element of filling. So I would say it should be mandatory for any operatives doing the filling process. I think they all should be always wearing PPE. It's absolutely necessary, because if they're wearing dirty clothes, they could have worn the day before. If they had been collecting mushrooms, all those spores from the third flushes are going to be on their clothes. They're going to infect the fresh crop. So it's important that they always, the growers always provide the operatives with disposable suits, gloves, and clean boots. So it's very important also to make sure your machine is spotless. It's disinfected, your conveyors, the concrete apron, and all equipment that's been used throughout the operation, that they're all clean and they're all disinfected. So what I'd be saying, if you're filling at 9 o'clock, get your filling guys in at an hour beforehand at 8 o'clock. Make sure that first of all that they're making sure the filling machine is working okay, and to give them time to disinfect all the machinery, and that there's enough contact time. So normally when you disinfect the machine, you leave the disinfectant for 15 minutes to half an hour, and then you go back in and you rinse the machinery down. So this, as the compost and casing lorries arrive to site, it's important that you also stop them before they get near the filling room, and you disinfect the back of the trucks before they open up the back of the trucks, and as well as the spinner boxes, make sure that they're also washed and disinfected before the operation commences. So the filling operatives, they should not be allowed to mix with the harvesters throughout the day. And what I would be recommending, a lot of growers actually took these measures and put them in place last year, is they actually got a separate porta cabin. So there'd be a separate canteen facility for the filling operatives and then the staff. So it basically means that they're not mixing throughout the day. And I think this is very important, because otherwise there is that chance that they will pick up spores, and they will then go back to the filling operation, and then they'll reinfect the crop. So ensuring that the filling operatives are not collecting mushrooms before the filling operation commences, that's vital. And like say, if your filling doesn't start till the evening time, make sure that you're only bringing your filling operatives in the evening time. Don't be having them in the morning, collecting mushrooms and doing other dirty jobs that they could potentially have spores in their clothes. Keep your mushroom skips away from the filling operation, because obviously if you've got mushroom skips, you're going to have flies in the skips. So keep the skips away from the operation if possible. Reduce your fan speed and seal the vents in nearby tunnels. So if you've got a third flush or a second flush that has high levels of disease, seal those tunnels up. It's basically preventing any spores coming out from the back vents that could possibly infect the crop. So after the operation is finished, close the doors immediately, get the room washed out, and get everything sealed up as quickly as possible to avoid more flies getting into the crop. Thoroughly wash your filling machine and your conveyors after the operation, and make sure there's no dirt or debris visible. Store the filling machine in a clean area where it cannot get contaminated. So just make sure wherever the conveyors and the filling machine is stored, make sure there's no dirt or debris, or there's no possibility that that area could get contaminated. So preparing your tunnel before and after the filling process, just important, get your foot dips ready. So have foot dips outside all your tunnels. But the big thing about foot dips, just make sure they're regularly maintained. I would say if you're not going to maintain them, I would say you're better off without the foot dips, because what it can do is you can actually harbor spores and debris in the foot dips, and then you can actually spread that dirt and spores into a clean room. So I'd say definitely, I think foot dips are a good idea, but as long as they're maintained, that's the key point. Make sure your fly filter at your fresh air intake is changed at the start of every crop. So you can see the picture below on the left hand side that that's a fresh filter on a fresh mushroom crop. Get your fly drums and your fly traps put up in place all around the tunnel, and that one thing, it'll catch flies, but the other thing it will do is it'll give the grower an indication of how many flies or is there increasing flies on the farm. On the fly traps as well, I'd recommend having fly traps in a number of different locations throughout the crop, and it may give the grower an indication whether there's flies coming in at the back, the filling door, or maybe they're coming from the central corridor. So might give the grower an indication where the flies may be coming from. Preventing access to the tunnels from the central corridor. Basically, put a physical barrier or a lock on the door in the central corridor if possible. It'll just mean, it'll prevent harvesters or anyone else from the farm, walking into a clean room after being in a third flush. Maybe they were looking for a trolley or something like that. So it's to avoid something like that from happening. Which it would mean the grower would only be able to access the tunnels from the filling doors. But it's a good way of just making sure that it's complete. The filling and pin heading rooms is completely sealed off from the central corridor until picking commences. And sealing your tunnels, it's vital important that you put the effort in this time of the year, especially to make sure your tunnels are well sealed. Spend a bit of money now, because you'll save it in the long run if you do a good job sealing your tunnels. Even there's short-term measures. There's a lot of old tunnels in Ireland, and short-term measures that can be put in place are, as you can see in the photo below, the fly traps. The fly sticky paper was put around the perimeter of the filling doors, and basically just what that meant is that it kept flies out, and the doors weren't in ideal condition, but it done the job. So it's a short-term measure. It's something that I'd strongly advise growers to do. Fogging, like Brendan mentioned in his previous presentation, at this time of the year, probably, if you're not fogging already, it might be worth considering to start fogging. Especially after you fill the tunnel, get your fogger in and get it going. Important considerations to take to consider when fogging. Just make sure that you're turning off your fresh air and you increase your fan speed, basically so that you'll be able to spread whatever product you're using. You fogger in the tunnel, that you get good enough contact. So if the fly population is too difficult to control, then you know yourself. Then you need to start fogging. So you can fog a case run, or you can also fog after your first flush. Just when you are fogging, whatever product you use, just be aware of the harvest intervals and application intervals, which I'll have in a later slide. So your fogging options, you've got Pyrethrum 5EC, or you've got Deagasc Protec. There is also Botanigard, but Botanigard, unfortunately, the off-label approval states that it can only be applied as a drench. There is also Naturalis L for UK growers. That comes in a liquid format, and that is safe to use by fogging. So that Naturalis L is approved for UK growers. Botanigard, there is a bit of work, I think, going on in the background to either get the off-label approval changed, or else get a product similar to Naturalis L approved, that it can be fogged onto crops. Always refer to the off-label approval. This presentation I have will be made available online on the Teagasc website. So as you can see here, I've got Pyrethrum, Deagasc, Botanigard, and Flipper all highlighted. It just means if you click on the highlighted product, it means that'll bring you to the off-label approval. So it's an easy way for growers to access the off-label approval. And every grower should have the off-label approval in their audit folder, and also be able to refer to it. The final product I also mentioned here is Flipper. It doesn't go on fogging; it is applied through a knapsack. Because we've lost FICAM, it could be an alternative. Growers could try using Flipper by applying it around surfaces and round vents, basically to see will it help controlling flies. So there's a lot we don't know about Flipper. We're doing our own experiments in Ashtown with Botanigard and Naturalis L and Flipper, and Deagasc Protec. So we're looking at these products in Ashtown, but we don't have definitive results, especially when it comes to Botanigard and Flipper. We don't know enough about these products yet and how they work in a mushroom crop. We know that they're quite effective in other horticulture crops, but we just need to examine it in a mushroom setting. In terms of nematode application, I'd say it's vitally important that growers, I would suggest growers continue using nematodes right throughout the year, and especially this time of year, if you're not using nematodes, I'd strongly recommend that you start using nematodes. The recommended rate, I suppose, would be 2 million per meter squared at case run. There's some growers applying more than that because they feel like it works better if you apply more. This is totally up to the grower's discretion, but 2 million should be your starting point at least. So the dilution rate is 0.5 to a litre of water per meter squared when mixing with the nematodes. The application day is normally during case run, so normally day 4, day 5, but it won't matter if it's earlier than that. It can also be applied at first flush, so normally at a rate of 1 million per meter squared. It's important that nematodes are stored in a fridge, and it's important also that the fridge temperature is also monitored, that the fridge temperature is below 4 degrees. It's important that when growers are getting nematodes, that they're using them as soon as possible, that they're not leaving them for a couple of weeks before they use them, because the nematodes will probably, there will be some mortality within the packs of nematodes. So it's best to use, first of all, check the expiry date to make sure that the nematode packs are in date, and use them as fresh as possible. So don't be building up stocks on your farm of nematodes. Get a constant inflow or a delivery every week of nematodes, what I'd be recommending. So just in terms of the application, mixing the nematodes in a bucket of water before adding to the mixing tank is important, just to make sure the nematodes is broken up, and ensure the nematodes are being constantly agitated during the application to ensure they don't settle at the bottom of the tank. Point number 5 is in relation to ruffling hygiene. Ruffling is a potential source of contamination, especially if the ruffler is not clean, or if it's not disinfected, or it's stored in a dirty area. So it's a key area. You know, coming in day 4, day 5 after filling, you're bringing a machine that could potentially spread disease into the crop. So it's important that the operatives again wear the disposable overalls, the gloves, and the clean boots. They disinfect the ruffler before the operation. They also do a visual inspection to make sure the ruffler is clean and there's no dirt or debris on it. And again, similar to the filling, the operatives should not be in contact with any other farm staff before or during the operation. So there's no chance of cross-contamination. It's important after the operation, thoroughly wash the ruffler. And obviously when you're washing the ruffler, make sure you're not washing in close proximity to a cropping room that could potentially reinfect the ruffler. And again, store in a clean shed. So your options here in terms of Sporegun or Orvando. First thing I'd ask every grower: is it totally necessary to use Sporegun or Orvando? It's good that growers can go without using either Sporegun or Orvando. It also it's a bit of a reality check to see where your disease levels are at, and so it puts it into perspective where how good is my hygiene on the farm. If I can go without using Sporegun or Orvando, your level of hygiene in the farm is pretty good. So it's obviously only use it when necessary. And if you are going to use a Sporegun or Orvando, alternate the products if possible. First of all, you should be monitoring, you should be recording disease, and your disease recording should influence your decision whether to use Sporegun or Orvando. Growers must be mindful that there is a 10-day harvest interval, so that's an important consideration. If using these products having no success, like I said, maybe take a sample of the disease and get it sent up to ourselves in Ashtown. We can have a look at it. We can test it for resistance against Sporegun or Orvando. So whether it's if you've got a sample of dry bubble or cobweb, and the problem's not going away, instead of spending a lot of money on Sporegun or Orvando, it might be worthwhile, like I said, getting a sample, get a test for resistance, and we can give you a definitive answer whether the product Sporegun or Orvando works. And just when using these products, always record the products on the usage records and inventory. So fly monitoring and disease recording. So first of all, every grower should be doing this. Is that it's important to detect the increase in flies and disease early. This is critical to prevent a disease outbreak. So use your fly trap. Have a designated fly trap in every tunnel, which you count every week. So your fly trap, I would recommend counting it once a week, and it's basically to see is there a significant increase in the number of flies in the tunnel. The daily disease record, it should be recorded every day. So at this stage, I think every farm in Ireland and the UK is at a size, I think, that is probably big enough that you can afford to have a full-time disease person. But making sure that the key point I want to make is that the crops are being checked every day. Don't have one disease person on your farm that will check the levels of disease and treat disease 5 days of the week, and then they go off at the weekend and there's nobody checking disease. You should have some part-time person in place there to make sure that they're checking the disease and you're recording that level of disease. And that by having that record, that should then influences the grower's decision whether to use a insecticide or use pesticides or fungicides. So the disease treatment process, the one point I'd like to make here is that if you've got somebody treating disease, make sure you give them the proper equipment to do the job correctly. The worst, if you don't give them the proper equipment and they're not going to do the job properly, you could be doing more damage than anything. That person treating disease could be spreading disease rather than than doing a good job in trying to contain the disease. So, like I said, one designated person on the farm and one part-time person should be always available as cover for that person who's on, if they're on holidays or they're off the weekend or whatever it may be. So, first thing I'd say is start checking your first flushes. I'd say it's necessary to maybe check your check at the first day of your first flush before the pickers even get into the room. I'd say it's necessary to check that the first flush, the first day of the first flush. And then if you don't see any piece of disease and the disease levels on the farm aren't too high, it mightn't be necessary to check that first flush until maybe the end. So day 4, day 5 of the first flush. But from there onwards, I would recommend you check every house every day. So follow through from the second to the third flush. Basically, what the message I'm trying to get across is that you don't start checking a third flush and then go back into a second flush or a first flush. That you're following that sequence, going from first to second to third. So just on the equipment, what equipment's necessary? Have a designated trolley for the disease treating person, so nobody else will use that trolley on the farm. Provide the person with plastic bags with a jug to pour the salt onto the affected area. Have paper towel, have a bucket of salt, head torch, water spray, disposable gloves, alcohol, hand gel, and a recording book to record the numbers of disease in each room. So disease identification and treatment. Treat the disease early is critical before it gets out of control. The picture you can see there on the right-hand side is an area that wasn't treated and was left grow. So at this stage, the disease, it's too late. That has got completely out of control. So if you've seen disease at that level on your farm, you know there's something not right. The disease isn't being treated properly, and it's going to cause huge problems down the road. So the higher disease levels get on your farm, the more difficult it will be to get it under control, as the spore load is so high. And this is in particular to farms I know that had a central corridor. Found it very difficult once they got high levels of disease in their farm. They found it very difficult to turn the I suppose turn the curve and get your disease levels low, because basically when you've got such high spores, when you open a door from a third flush that is heavily infected with disease, those spores are going straight out into the corridor, and basically it's everywhere around the farm at that stage. So the biggest thing is preventing it getting to that stage. So it's important that you train your staff on how to identify the disease and treat each disease correctly. It's something I don't think is done enough in Ireland, because look, I still to this day go around farms and there'll be an awful lot of farms that wouldn't be treating disease correctly, and it's a weakness. But if the grower puts a wee bit of time into training the staff how to do it, I have training procedures on how to do this. If you're ever looking for a bit of assistance, contact myself and I can help you out with the training. If flushes have high levels of disease, don't water crop is what I'd say. I think you're looking for trouble if especially if you've got a first flush maybe that has piece of disease. Already you're in a losing battle. It might be best to just say, okay, I'm not going to water this. I'm going to try and get as much of a second flush off it as I can, and then remove the crop and cook it out. But the one thing is, as soon as you start watering the crop, if there's disease areas not treated, it's going to basically splash the spores, and they're going to go airborne. So it's going to just multiply the levels of disease you have. And one thing I'd recommend is that you always check the crop before you water. So if you're picking off today, before you actually go in with your water, and I know growers are eager to get the water in as soon as the pick off crop, just try and get your disease treater in there, checking the crop beforehand, making sure all the piece of disease is treated, is covered and treated properly before you then decide to go in with water. And like I said, it's important then to just record and monitor the disease levels. So I'll just go through treating cobweb and verticillium. Cobweb, so it's a very dusty spore, as we know, and it's very powdery, and it can go airborne. And so just in terms of treating that disease, you need to use some paper. First thing I would do is pick off any mushrooms around the disease, but not touching the disease. So if there's mushrooms in close proximity around that affected area, pick those mushrooms off and seal them with a plastic bag and maybe throw them away. But the one thing is you do not want to be touching any mushrooms or the disease itself. If you do, you need the diseased person needs to change their gloves. So once you have the mushrooms picked off, get some paper that's wet and wet the paper and place it gently over the cobweb. Then you take your jug of salt and you apply it around the perimeter of the paper, making sure that you have it's basically sealed, and then do it in a circle so that it completely seals all the paper around the side, and then completely cover the paper. So that should be effective treatment of cobweb, and it should do a good job in preventing it from spreading. In terms of treating Verticillium michogni, you can see here the photos on the photo on the left to the right. So the photos on the left, that's removing the pieces of mushrooms around the disease and cover them with plastic and then dispose of those mushrooms. Then cover the disease, but just be careful when you are applying the salt on top of the affected area that it's not I suppose it's not too heavy, that it's going to start creating spores aren't going to be dispersed. And then finally, once the disease is covered, push down on the bottom of push down with the jug to press the disease. That'll break the stalk and prevent the disease from growing through the salt. So picking mushrooms off around the disease, do not touch the disease, avoid watering if disease levels are too high, and cover disease cover the disease. If you are intending to go back in with water, maybe best to cover disease with tissue, then dry tissue, especially if you're watering, to avoid the water splashing the salt off the affected area. So controlling cobweb and verticillium outbreak. So if you have an outbreak on your farm, what should I do? First thing I'd say, like I said, stop watering after pick off. Segregate the area with high disease infection. So if you're watering with a watering tree and you know there's a particular area that's bad with disease and you still want to continue watering, segregate that area and just make sure that you avoid watering in that area. And it's basically a no-go area. I would avoid picking that area from there on, because anytime you even go in to pick that area, you're going to spread disease. So, and what I'd also do is intensify the crop examination. So if you're checking the crop once a day, I would increase that to twice a day. So in the morning and the evening, especially if you've got high levels of disease. Reduce your fan speeds, and like I said earlier, cut back to 2 flushes. I know it's not a preferred option because you're obviously going to lose out, but maybe short-term loss will lead to long-term gain here. So limit the harvester spreading disease. So first of all, pick clean crops first and reduce harvester movement between flushes. Keep the doors closed as much as possible, and especially if the farm has a central corridor. So you don't want to be keeping your doors open for long periods of time. Keep them closed as much as possible. And like I said, if you've got central corridor, that's even more important. Train the harvesters on disease identification, I think is a good idea, because then the harvesters, when they're picking the crop, they'll be able to identify an area that has disease and then just mark it out with a piece of paper, or just making sure it'll make the disease treater's job much easier if it's marked out on the crop. If possible, leave trolleys in the tunnel throughout the crop and avoid moving them to other houses. If you have enough, that's obviously not every grower has enough trolleys that they can do that, but it is a good idea if you can just leave them in the tunnel. Reduce the harvester numbers in the infected rooms. So if you have a third flush with high disease, limit the amount of harvesters. Have the least amount of harvesters that you need going into those rooms. So from the harvester's point of view, making sure they wash their buckets, their knives, and their hands regularly. Ensure the harvesters change their gloves regularly and use the alcohol hand gel when leaving and entering the tunnel. Making sure they use the foot dips is important going in and out of the tunnel also. And if there's high levels of disease in the farm, it might be best that you equipped the harvesters with disposable overalls. Again, this is an added cost, but it's probably best. I would say it's best practice especially if you're starting to get disease in first flushes. I would certainly third flushes and possibly second flushes. give harvesters disposable overalls. And just for growers who tend to clean in between the flushes, I just err caution. If you are cleaning the floors in between the flushes, just be careful that you don't go in there with a power washer, that you're not raising spores and circulating disease while you're doing that process. Next point, the central corridor itself. It's central corridor. I've noticed it can be an area that'll just harbour disease. I noticed the farms that struggled to get rid of disease last year was all the farms that had a central corridor leading onto their farm. So it can be an area that will, you'll find a lot of disease in this area. The important things I would tell growers to do is that if disease becomes more prevalent, increase the number of times you wash and you disinfect the corridor per week. Some growers will get away with washing and disinfecting corridors once or twice a week. But if disease becomes more prevalent, increase that number. Maybe, some growers that actually went to disinfecting their corridors once a day, and it done a really good job in cleaning up the farm. Have a cleaning procedure in place for cleaning your canteens, your toilets, and your door handles. Those jobs should be done daily, because you've got traffic going in and out of tunnels every day and going into your canteens and your toilets. These jobs should be done every day, making sure that, and it's probably the role of the disease treating person that they're responsible for making sure that the cleaning procedure is carried out. I would also suggest maybe having fly drums in the corridor. So have fly drums in multiple areas throughout the corridor to catch any flies coming out, which could potentially go into a fresh tunnel then. And just another point is ensure adequate ventilation. It's best if you have some sort of ventilation, or you have a breeze going through your corridor rather than having it enclosed, and basically so flies can move within the corridor. Crates was reported to me last year as a pretty big issue. First thing I'd say is if crates are not washed, they could potentially be a source of infection. One thing I'd say is inspect the crates when they're delivered. Avoid putting dirty crates in first flushes if possible. If you are noticing a high number of crates being dirty, report it to your supplier, whoever it may be. Some growers actually went to the hassle of investing in a crate washer, and the growers have reported to me, they felt that had a massive impact on controlling disease levels. They've now, some of the growers I've spoke to have continued washing crates even though they're clean, their farm is clean. What they're doing is they're only washing crates going into the first flush, and they find it's very effective. And some of the growers quoting to me, they'd actually stopped using any chemicals, and they're just taking this precaution. Cook out. So what I'd be recommending is that everyone continuously cooking out throughout the year, that you don't go through a period where you stop cooking out because you have no disease. I would still recommend that you continue cooking out. Cooking, and on that point, I'd like to say maybe you'd be better off cooking crops rather than empty tunnels now. It's fine cooking out empty tunnels if you've got no disease, but then if you do have a piece of disease and you don't cook out that crop, when you go to empty that crop, your spores are starting to go everywhere, and there's where the levels of disease will start picking up. So especially from now onwards, I'd be saying to growers, cook out your crops rather than the empty tunnels, and do both if you have time. So another important thing is monitor your cookouts. So a lot of growers will tell me I'm doing a cookout and I still have disease, but actually when you go back and you look in the FANCOM and you check how good the cookout was, did it reach the required temperature? In a lot of cases it doesn't. So keep an eye on your cookouts to make sure that you're reaching your 60 or 65 degrees, and that should give you a decent level of kill. So like I said as well, another important thing is if you could cook out your trolleys and cook out crates and other dirty equipment when you're cooking out a crop. It's a good idea, but just don't cook out a trolley if it's an electric trolley, obviously. Seal the exhaust vents to avoid the heat leaving the room. Try and keep the heat within the room, and be able to get the air temperature up quicker. And sacrifice any third flushes if any disease are in first flushes. It's the first massive warning, I suppose, for me when I was growing. Is if you were starting to get disease in first flushes, I would automatically think I need to start. That's a crop I will probably need to cook out a third flush. So it's important from that point of view. Coming near the end here, so emptying the crop. Ensure the crop is cooked out before emptying to avoid spores being circulated around the farm. It's a good idea also to have a cover over the emptying conveyor to avoid the spores and dust and debris, especially in a windy day, that they're not spreading all around the farm. Thoroughly wash out the emptying conveyors and the winch after operation, and then obviously do not store spent mushroom compost on site. Net washing and washing trolleys. So again, important piece of equipment. If you do decide to wash the nets on the concrete apron and you don't have a net washer, just make sure that the concrete apron is washed and disinfected before you start the process. Make sure that your brushes and your jets in the net washer are in good condition. If they're not, they need to be replaced, because you're not going to clean your net sufficiently if they're not in good condition. And like I said, then making sure that you're washing your trolleys after each house, or if you're moving from one crop to another. Washing and disinfecting empty tunnels. It's important that you put a fair bit of emphasis into making sure that your tunnels are washed and cleaned, because again, it'll save you money in the long run if you spend an extra hour washing and disinfecting your tunnel. You'll probably save it at the back end by having to treat disease. So putting a bit of effort into this job is important. What I'd be recommending, first of all, remove the dirt and debris off the floor after emptying. Possibly a good idea to maybe apply sodium hypochlorite on the floor. It basically removes the dirt, lift the dirt off the floor. Then go in and wash the shelving, the floors, the doors, etc., leaving no compost and casing debris, and clean the drains. And then finally, when you have all that done, maybe go in with a disinfectant, disinfect all the tunnel, and that should give you a high level of cleaning. At that stage, the tunnel should be very clean. So here's just a couple of useful links. Like I said, I'll put this presentation up on the Teagasc website. So if you want to look in at some of these files and videos, so you've got the cobweb disease control video. You've got identification and control of cobweb, identification and control of dry bubble, fungal diseases of mushrooms and their control, and the use of chemical disinfectants in mushroom production. So then as well, this is also useful if growers want to refer to it. Here's the list of approved products and the rates, the maximum number of applications, the harvest intervals, and the application interval. I'm not going to go through all this, but it's useful for growers then if they want to reference it, if they want to check what is the usage rate or the number of applications per crop I can use. So it's just useful to have that as well if you're looking it up on the Teagasc website. So that's everything from me. My final take-home message is prevention is always better and cheaper than control. The more effort you put into preventing disease in your crop, and first of all, you'll save a lot more money. So that's really the big take-home message I have. So I'll open up the session for questions. And so I see I've got a question coming through here. When applying something like Sporegun or nematodes, how accurate is application? How much is applied beyond the crop area and onto the floor by overshooting the crop surface, diluting the effect? Well, the way I'd answer that is that's going to be on a crop. That's going to be on a farm by farm basis. You really need, what I'd be doing if I was you, I would be looking at my water distribution going onto the crop. So maybe when you have a crop finished, what you could do is remove the casing and put punnets out on the bed, and maybe assess what is the water distribution going onto the bed, and does that match what you thought was going onto the crop? So I think that would be a good measure that you could do to maybe look to see is there an accurate amount of water being applied, and that will then refer to when you're applying chemicals. So do I have any other questions? No, I don't have any other questions coming up here on the Q&A box. So
questions in the chat there, Donal.
Oh, sorry, is there? Oh, sorry. Okay. So question, how long would you cook out an empty room for? It doesn't need to be for very long. Really, all you're looking to do is get the air temperature up. So you'd be looking to maybe 2 to 3 hours, I'd say, at most. So basically, if you can get the air temperature up to 60 to 65 degrees quickly, that should be ideal. And once it reaches that temperature, you can turn off your steamer then. Okay. So that's all the questions. Quick question here also coming up. Is there any new upcoming pesticide products coming down the line? The answer to that is no.
There is.
Okay.
Yeah, there is actually. Yeah.
There's certainly a fungicide on the horizon where one of the companies is working on getting a fungicide approved for mushrooms, and hopefully it will get there before Sporegun disappears, which is going to happen in the next 2 years, I think. These dates always keep moving, so I can never remember what exactly is the story, but there is a fungicide on the horizon. No, we'll await first approval and then when it comes. But yeah, the target is to have a new fungicide in place before Sporegun's last, but whether that actually happens or not, I don't know.
Okay. No, that's positive news, yeah.
Brendan, is that a completely new fungicide, or is there an existing one?
No, completely new.
Completely new. And that'd be interesting. Yeah.
Very good. Okay, another question coming in here. Donal, what is the consensus on spent mushroom compost being stored on site or near to site, especially if spent mushroom compost is not cooked out before emptying?
Even cooked out, it still should be no, because the biggest effect of it is going to be flies.
Exactly. So I'd be keeping it, like, Helen, have you done any research on it, or how far away should it be?
It should be removed. It should really be removed as quickly as possible. The biggest, even if it's cooked out, as Brendan was saying, it's going to be attracting flies. It's organic matter. It's heaven for flies. So any flies on site will be attracted to that spent mushroom compost and reproducing, building up your population. So it definitely needs to be removed off site. We did have a case where a grower with trichoderma, persistent problem with trichoderma, and it turned out he was storing uncooked out spent compost on site on a regular basis.
It's just not a good idea.
No.
Okay. We've got another question in here. Any work going on in relation to replacing casing?
There's plenty work going on, but whether it's successful or not remains to be seen.
That's right. We've got our own. I suppose we've got our own projects that's and proposals that's going on. So maybe I'll talk to you individually about that, Tom.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's a big issue, not just for mushroom casing, for horticultural peat as well. And there's a big push to try and find replacements, but how effective they are and how good, how well performing they are is open to
debate.
Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect.
There's a question there from the UK about Flipper in the UK. Do we know an answer for that?
I think I know that Flipper is approved in the UK, however, not for mushroom crops. It doesn't have an off-label approval for applying to mushroom crops. I'm 99% sure of that. But like I said, it's approved for other horticulture crops.
Right, because there is, in the case of the Bavaria, it turned out that doesn't mention mushrooms, but it actually is approved for mushrooms because it's approved for all protected crops, and mushrooms qualify as a protected crop under the definition in the UK. So I'm just wondering about Flipper, whether that would apply there or not.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, Brendan. I knew about the Bavaria bassiana was approved, and that's why Naturalis L is approved. It's the product that's carrying it. So I'm pretty sure, but I can come back to.
Sorry. There is an answer there as well. Sorry, there is an emo application for use. The answer's there underneath it.
Okay. Okay, for me, AHB. That's good. Yeah.
I suppose we probably need to be mindful too that we don't have some of these approvals are coming in without necessarily having had experiments done to evaluate their performance. So I think we still probably wouldn't have a great feel for whether or not they're effective or not. So just to bear that in mind, that until we get some good data to show that yes, they are effective, you know, we can't say for certain that they are. Because I know Basinia, the Bavaria products, they'd be more slow acting because they have to wait for the fungus to colonize the flies, and that takes time. So it won't be fast acting like Pyrethrum 5EC, for example. You won't get the same knockdown. So, you know, we need to be getting some data to give us confidence in using them or not, whether they're effective or not. We don't know that yet.
Yeah, and that's it. These bio products, I suppose, what we might see in the future is that they might be used in combination. You know, we might be using a number of different bio products to try and get us to the end goal of, you know, having less flies or less disease or whatever it is. So, but look, that's what the challenge is. So, look, that's all the questions that's coming up on the chat. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. And we'll keep you updated with any upcoming webinars in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so I'd like to thank Brendan and Helen for also coming on, and Brendan for doing an excellent presentation. So I'll leave it there. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye.